Amara was the type of person who lived life on her terms. A confident and independent young woman, she was in her final year of college, juggling a heavy workload and a part-time job. Her days were a whirlwind of lectures, assignments, and social plans, leaving little room for what she deemed unnecessary distractions, like old traditions or spirituality. That morning, as the city buzzed with the festive energy of Christmas, Amara found herself rushing through her small apartment. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, half-packed, with clothes spilling out as she scrambled to find her charger. Outside, the streets were alive with the glow of twinkling lights, carolers singing on the corners, and families preparing for the holidays. But for Amara, the holiday spirit was merely background noise to her chaotic routine. Her phone rang, pulling her attention away from the mess on her bed. It was her mother calling from the village. "Amara, have you packed everything? And don't forget to pray before you leave." Her mother's warm, yet insistent voice came through the line. Amara sighed, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder, while stuffing a pair of shoes into her suitcase. "Mama, I'm running late. The bus leaves in less than an hour. I'll be fine. It's just a quick trip." Her mother's tone turned stern. "You know how important it is to pray before traveling, especially during Christmas. There are so many dangers on the road, Amara. Promise me you'll do it." Amara rolled her eyes, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Mama, I'll be fine. I've made this trip 100 times. You worry too much." "I worry because I love you," her mother replied softly. "Please don't ignore this. Just a few minutes of prayer can make all the difference." But Amara was already distracted, zipping up her suitcase and mentally checking off her list of essentials. "All right, Mama, I'll see you soon. Love you," she said quickly before hanging up. As she slipped her phone into her bag, Amara shook her head. Her mother had always been deeply religious, a firm believer in the power of prayer and divine protection. Amara, on the other hand, saw it as outdated. She respected her mother's beliefs, but didn't see how a few whispered words could change anything. Her logical mind couldn't reconcile faith with reality. With her suitcase in tow, she stepped out into the crisp December air. The city felt alive, buzzing with excitement as people hurried to catch buses and flights, laden with gifts and luggage. Amara felt a twinge of excitement herself. It had been months since she'd seen her family, and despite her skepticism about traditions, Christmas at home was always special. As she climbed into a cab headed for the bus station, she didn't notice the dark clouds gathering on the horizon or the faint sense of unease creeping into the festive air. For Amara, this was just another trip. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to pray for. But deep down, her mother's words lingered, echoing faintly in the back of her mind. Something about them felt heavier than usual, as though they carried a warning she wasn't ready to hear. The bus station was alive with the buzz of holiday travellers. Children ran around with candy canes in hand, families lugged overstuffed bags, and carolers sang faintly in the background, adding to the chaotic yet cheerful atmosphere. Amara navigated through the crowd, her suitcase bumping into a few ankles as she made her way to the line for her bus. When she finally boarded, the inside of the bus was just as lively, though slightly claustrophobic. People were crammed into every seat, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of laughter, chatter, and the occasional scolding of restless children. Festive music played faintly through the bus speakers, though it was barely audible over the noise. Amara found a window seat and settled in, slipping her headphones on to block out the world. She pulled out her phone, scrolling aimlessly through her social media feed. Pictures of friends with their families, Christmas decorations, and holiday feasts filled her screen. She felt a twinge of envy, but quickly dismissed it. She had her own plans, her own life. As the bus rumbled to life, she glanced at the driver. He looked weary, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he smiled reassuringly at the passengers. "Don't worry, folks, we'll get there safe and sound," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Amara turned back to her phone, ignoring the small nagging feeling in her chest. She chalked it up to her mother's earlier call. A few rows behind her, an elderly man sat with his hands clasped tightly, his lips moving in silent prayer. She caught a glimpse of him in the reflection of the window. His words were inaudible, but there was an intensity in his expression that unsettled her. The bus began its journey, the city lights fading into the distance as they moved onto the highway. The forecast had promised clear skies, but as they drove further, Amara noticed the faintest hint of dark clouds gathering on the horizon. She shook her head, dismissing it. Weather changed all the time, it was nothing. The bus lights flickered for a moment, catching her attention. A strange chill crept up her spine, and she pulled her coat tighter around her. The heater was on, so why did it suddenly feel so cold? A woman across the aisle leaned over to her seatmate, whispering just loud enough for Amara to catch a fragment of their conversation. They say this road's cursed around Christmas. So many accidents over the years. Amara rolled her eyes and put her headphones back on. Superstitions, rumours and bad luck. None of it meant anything to her. People like to scare themselves for no reason. Still, as the bus rolled on, she couldn't help but feel a strange weight in the air. The cheerful chatter around her began to fade into the background, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the faint, growing sense that something wasn't quite right. The bus pulled into a rest stop just outside a sleepy town, the dim lights casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. Amara stretched in her seat, taking a moment to let her eyes rest from the screen. She needed a break, but as she stood and made her way down the aisle to the door, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. The old man from earlier was sitting near the exit, his eyes fixed on her with a strange intensity. He had moved from his seat and now stood in front of her, blocking her path as she reached for the bus door. "Get off the bus," he said, his voice low and urgent. His eyes, tired but sharp, were filled with a mix of concern and something darker. Amara blinked in confusion, taken aback by his sudden appearance. "What? Excuse me?" she asked, looking past him to the other passengers who were filing out for the stop. He grabbed her arm with surprising strength, his grip cold and firm. "This road is cursed. You didn't pray, did you? You're not safe here. Get off the bus while you still can." Amara pulled back her arm, irritated, but still trying to keep her composure. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm fine. I'll be fine," she said, brushing him off as nothing more than an eccentric old man. People like him were always spouting nonsense, preying on fear, and she wasn't about to let herself be affected by it. Without another word, she stepped around him, taking a deep breath of the cold night air as she exited the bus. Her feet crunched against the gravel beneath her, but the moment didn't feel right. It was as if the world had grown quiet, the noise of the station fading away, leaving her standing on the edge of something she couldn't name. The bus driver, who'd been leaning against the side of the bus, called out that they'd be leaving soon, snapping Amara from her thoughts. She shook off the lingering chill and climbed back onto the bus, trying to ignore the old man's warning, which felt almost like an echo in her mind. The journey continued as the bus pulled back onto the highway, but the atmosphere inside was different. The jovial mood had faded. A heavy silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine. The dark clouds that had been gathering now loomed above them, swirling in a way that felt unnatural. The fog began to creep across the road, dense and suffocating, swallowing up the headlights. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The faint outlines of trees and road signs appeared like shadows in the mist. Amara couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, something more than just the weather. Her pulse quickened and she glanced around at the other passengers, noticing the unease in their eyes, the way they fidgeted in their seats, clutching their belongings a little tighter than usual. The bus jolted suddenly, as if something had struck it from the outside. A murmur ran through the crowd, followed by the sound of the driver's voice, muffled but frantic. "Hold on!" he yelled. "Hold on, everybody!" Without warning, the bus lurched to the side, the tires screeching as the driver swerved violently to the right, narrowly avoiding something in the road. Amara's heart slammed into her chest, and she gripped the seat in front of her as the bus seemed to lose control. There was a fleeting glimpse, of a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, its outline barely visible in the fog. The figure was tall and unnervingly still, and Amara felt a cold wave of fear surge through her veins. The bus veered sharply, skidding off the road with a sickening crunch as it crashed into a ditch, sending passengers flying from their seats. The metal groaned in protest, and the world spun in a chaotic blur as the vehicle came to a halt. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, the chaos erupted. The bus was tilted at an angle, and people scrambled to assess their injuries, shouting for help, their voices tinged with panic. Amara's head throbbed from where it had slammed into the window, but she was unhurt. Her heart still raced, and the cold sweat clung to her skin as she looked around in shock. But then, her eyes locked onto something that chilled her to the bone. The old man was nowhere to be seen. He had been there just a moment ago, standing in front of her, warning her about the curse. Now, it was as though he had vanished into thin air. The thought of him still lingered in her mind, but there was no sign of him on the bus, and no one seemed to remember him either. The fear that had been building inside Amara suddenly felt more real than ever. She had dismissed the warning, brushed it off as nonsense, but now, in the aftermath of the crash, the chilling sense of dread washed over her with full force. Something was wrong, and she wasn't sure if it was too late to escape it. Amara's heart raced in her chest, the aftershock of the crash still vibrating through her limbs. The air was thick with panic, a mix of fear and confusion that made it hard to focus. The other passengers huddled together near the bus, trying to keep calm, some tending to minor injuries, others just muttering nervously about what had happened. But Amara couldn't shake the feeling. The crash was unsettling, but there was something deeper gnawing at her, something that told her she couldn't stay there. It felt wrong to remain in that spot, like they were waiting for something else to find them. A heavy silence loomed over the group as the fog continued to roll in, but the lack of immediate help made her restless. She scanned the surrounding road, eyes darting through the mist, hoping to see any sign of civilization. There had to be a phone signal somewhere, or at least a house where she could ask for help. Her instincts kicked in, urging her to move. She stood up, brushing the dirt off her clothes, and made a decision. "I'm going to find some help," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Her voice sounded hollow in the thick, damp air. A few passengers turned to her, their expressions filled with concern. "Don't go!" one of them called, her voice laced with fear. "It's too dangerous out there in this fog. We need to stay together." Another voice joined in. "Stay here. We'll wait for the authorities. Someone will come soon." Amara looked at them, their words momentarily tugging at her, but the urge to leave was overwhelming. She could feel the weight of their stares, the growing unease among them, but she couldn't ignore the unsettling pull she felt in the pit of her stomach. She needed to move. "I'll be fine," she reassured them, trying to mask the uncertainty creeping into her own mind. "I just need to find a phone. I'll be back soon." Without waiting for any more objections, she turned and began walking into the thick fog, the road stretching out before her, deserted and quiet. The whispers of the passengers faded as she moved farther away, the sound swallowed by the dense mist. Her footsteps were muffled on the wet ground, each one seeming to echo in the silence around her. It wasn't long before she felt the strange sensation that she was being watched. At first, it was a passing feeling, a mere tickle on the back of her neck. But soon it grew more pronounced, more insistent. The hairs on her arms stood on end, and her breath came faster, each step she took making her feel increasingly exposed. She quickened her pace, but the eerie sensation didn't fade. Then, she heard it, a faint whisper, as if carried by the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low and indistinct, murmuring just beyond her hearing. She stopped, her heart leaping into her throat, and looked around, but the fog swallowed everything, nothing but grey mist and silence. She shook her head. "It's just the wind," she muttered, trying to reassure herself. But then came the laugh. It wasn't a friendly laugh, but something chilling and malicious, echoing through the trees that lined the side of the road. It sent a shiver down her spine, and she froze. The sound seemed to come from all directions, bouncing off the fog surrounding her. It was a laugh full of mockery, as if whatever was out there found her fear amusing. Amara swallowed hard, the fear gripping her now more than ever. She was alone in this desolate stretch of road, and the world around her seemed to be closing in. That's when she saw it. At the edge of the road, barely visible through the dense fog, stood an old, dilapidated church. Its tall, dark windows seemed to peer out from the mist, and the rusted bell tower loomed above it, as though watching her every move. The door, creaking on its hinges, swung open slowly, inviting her in. The sense of foreboding grew stronger, but Amara's curiosity got the better of her. It was the only place she could see, and it was better than wandering aimlessly on the fog-covered road. She approached cautiously, the heavy air pressing down on her as she crossed the threshold. The church was silent, eerily so. The air inside felt thick and heavy, as if it had been trapped for years. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light that filtered in through the stained glass windows, casting jagged, colourful patterns on the floor. The atmosphere was oppressive. It was as though the building itself was alive, its ancient walls watching her every move. As she stepped further into the church, her eyes were drawn to strange shadows on the walls. They flickered unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to change every time she looked away, figures that appeared to be kneeling in prayer, their heads bowed in silent reverence. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of the sight, but the shadows were wrong, distorted, moving in ways that weren't possible. In a daze, she wandered further into the church. Her feet led her to an old, cracked mirror on the far wall. She hadn't noticed it before, but as she stepped closer, she felt a cold chill run up her spine. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't her. Her reflection was terrified. Amara recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at her own face, contorted in terror, eyes wide and wild. But the most horrifying detail was the blood, dark and crimson, dripping from her reflection's eyes in a steady stream, staining her cheeks and neck. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she stumbled back, unable to tear her gaze away. The blood flowed from her reflection, a steady, unnatural stream, while her own body remained unmoving, untouched. She tried to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. Panic surged, flooding her chest. She turned to leave, her feet unsteady beneath her, but as she reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the church, the force of it shaking the very walls. Amara yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something far stronger than her, held it closed, trapping her inside. The church was no longer just an abandoned building. It had become a prison, and Amara was its unwilling guest. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the whispers, the laughter, everything around her, now felt alive with malicious intent. She was not alone, and she realized, too late, that the true danger wasn't just the road ahead, but what she had unleashed by not listening to the old man's warning. Amara stood frozen, heart racing, as the door to the church creaked open. The old man stepped inside, but he wasn't the same man she had seen earlier. His frail, hunched posture had vanished, replaced by a tall, imposing figure who moved with a calm, almost supernatural grace. His eyes, once dull and weary, now gleamed with an ethereal intensity that made her blood run cold. He stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming in the heavy air of the church. The whispers that had haunted her moments ago now faded into an eerie silence, as if the very building was holding its breath. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice deep and unwavering. It wasn't the frail mutter of the old man she remembered. It was the voice of someone, something far older. But now you are here. Amara's throat tightened, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Who are you? She stammered, backing away as he approached. The old man, the spiritual guide, as he had revealed, smiled gently, his eyes softening. I am the one who watches over those who travel this road. I have warned many before you, but few listen. Amara blinked, confusion flooding her mind. Warned me? What do you mean? He paused, his gaze turning distant, as if recalling something from another time. This road, this cursed stretch, has claimed many lives over the years. Decades ago, a group of travelers ignored the warnings to pray before their journey. They believed they were safe, blinded by their pride, by their disbelief. But they were wrong. The air seemed to grow colder as the man's words sank in, the shadows in the church seeming to deepen. On Christmas Eve, their bus crashed, and all aboard perished. Their souls, restless, now haunt this road. They seek out those who fail to honor the ritual, to pray and punish them for their ignorance. Amara's heart sank. The fog, the whispers, the laugh, all of it made sense now. She had ignored the old man's warning, brushed off the strange occurrences as coincidence. But there was no escaping it now. You, the old man continued, were vulnerable because you did not heed the call. But you still have a choice. Amara's breath caught in her throat, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like an unbearable burden. You can stay here, the man said, his voice taking on a darker edge. Become one of the spirits that linger, trapped in this place forever. Amara's knees wobbled, and she fought to steady herself. The thought of being lost here, trapped for eternity, was unbearable. But, the old man added, if you truly seek redemption, if you pray with sincerity and seek forgiveness, the road will release you. Your soul can be freed. The choice lay before her. To stay in this cursed realm, forever bound to the fog and the shadows, or to cast herself into prayer, to find the faith she had neglected and hope that it would be enough to escape. She closed her eyes, her mind reeling. Could she truly escape? Could prayer undo the wrong she had done, the sins she had carried? The road ahead, both literal and spiritual, was uncertain, but one thing was clear: time was running out. Amara's heart raced as she stood in the dark, eerie church, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Her pride, her skepticism, everything she had relied on for so long, fought against her now. How could she, someone who had dismissed faith and prayer for years, suddenly surrender to something she had so often mocked? The very thought felt foreign, a betrayal of everything she believed about herself. But as she stood there, facing the old man and the chilling emptiness of the church, something within her shifted. Her gaze fell to the floor, where dust motes danced in the weak light, filtering through the stained glass windows. Her thoughts turned to her mother, her gentle, devout mother, who had always encouraged her to pray, who had called her before the journey, warning her to seek the divine protection. The words of her mother's prayers echoed in her mind, faint but clear. She could hear the soft lilt of her voice, teaching her the prayers when she was little. How to seek strength in times of fear and doubt. With trembling hands, Amara kneeled on the cold floor of the church. Her voice caught at first, the words hesitant, unfamiliar. But as she spoke the familiar phrases, her doubts slowly began to melt away. The coldness in the air seemed to recede, replaced by a warmth that filled her chest. A sense of peace, a kind of weightlessness, began to wash over her. The darkness in the church lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. The tremors beneath her intensified as the spirits, once bound to her, began to fade, drawn away by the sincerity of her prayer. The air around her felt lighter, less oppressive. The church doors, which had once been closed and forbidding, now creaked open with a soft groan. The old man, his expression softer now, smiled approvingly. Faith has the power to protect. Never forget that again. A blinding light enveloped Amara, and for a moment she felt herself lifted, as though the very ground beneath her had dissolved. The fog, the eerie whispers, the terror, all of it vanished, leaving only warmth and light. As the light began to fade, Amara opened her eyes. She was no longer in the church. The world outside, the fog, and the shadows were gone. The road, now clear and safe, stretched out before her, guiding her home. Amara slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the bright light of the rescue workers' flashlights. The fog had dissipated, and the world seemed strangely calm. She was lying on the cold ground near the bus, but it was no longer the terrifying, supernatural place it had been earlier. The crash site, now illuminated by the bright beams of emergency lights, was a far cry from the nightmare she had just experienced. As she sat up, she saw the other passengers being attended to by rescue workers, some with minor cuts and bruises, others shaking but alive. It was a relief. Everyone had survived. Yet, something felt amiss. Amara looked around, searching for the old man who had warned her, who had guided her through the terrifying ordeal. He was nowhere to be found. She approached one of the rescue workers, her voice trembling as she asked, "Did anyone see the old man? The one who warned us?" The worker glanced at her with a confused expression. "Old man? We didn't see anyone like that. Just you and the other passengers. You've all been very lucky. It's a miracle you're all okay." Amara's heart sank. The old man, the eerie church, the strange journey. Had it all been real? She couldn't deny the transformation she had felt, the peace that had washed over her as she prayed. But now, it seemed as though none of it had happened at all. Was it just a dream? She stayed at the crash site for a while longer, trying to make sense of everything. The other passengers seemed unaware of the supernatural occurrences, simply relieved to be alive and heading home for the holidays. Later that evening, Amara finally reached her home. She opened the door to find her mother waiting for her, a warm smile on her face. As soon as Amara entered, her mother embraced her tightly, her worry melting into relief. Amara clung to her, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have listened to you. I should have prayed before traveling. Everything. It was so real. The old man, the church." Her mother gently stroked her hair, sensing the depth of Amara's newfound understanding. "I know, my child. I know. But you're home now, and that's all that matters." Amara pulled back, looking into her mother's eyes with a renewed sense of gratitude. "I will never ignore your advice again, Mama. I promise. I've learned that faith is everything." On Christmas Day, Amara gathered her family around the table, her heart full of both gratitude and newfound humility. With a steady voice, she led them in prayer, thanking God for their safety, for the blessings they had, and for the lessons learned. As she finished the prayer, Amara felt a deep sense of peace, the kind that only comes from true faith and understanding. She knew she would carry this lesson with her always, never again to doubt the power of prayer and spirituality.